specializes in treating oppositional adolescents. She focuses on areas including addiction and budding personality disorders. She is an EMDR consultant and is an expert at using this therapy strategy with the high-risk nature of her clients. She has worked in a range of settings, including transitional living, inpatient rehabilitation, intensive outpatient treatment, and and private practice. It is common for her clients to be struggling with active addiction, self-harm, suicidal ideation, broken relationships, psychiatric hospital visits, illegal activity, and uncertain futures. Jen is currently a doctoral student seeking a PhD in addiction psychology at North Central University. She's a therapist at Prime Counseling, which specializes in treating dysfunctional family units. She's a consultant to families and therapists through her own company, which we will link hyperlink to at jenshotwell.com. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Jen so we can get started with her presentation.
Perfect. Okay, I am going to give a little introduction in just like my style of presentation. I will probably move around. I will stand, I will sit, I will move the screen. It just kind of depends on like where my energy flow is going. And then the other thing is I struggle between, even just gonna start moving that. I struggle between like authenticity of cuss words, stories, and professionalism of like no cuss words and you thinking that I'm not ratchet. So like I will go between like a fine line of that, because if I have to, like if I put professionalism as my forefront, then I lose like a certain kind of like part of the presentation that I think is important. So I try to tone it down, but I would challenge you, if you don't like cussing, just to like, put your ears up. And yeah, it's just kind of a thing of it. I've done presentations where I don't cuss at all and it's just bland and it's like not as much fun to me. So this is who I am. He said it all. The stories that I do share though, there will be some facts changed. So I do give, like, they are real client stories, but what I will do is change enough about it so that you wouldn't really be able to tell who they are. I will say it's a guy instead of it being a girl. I'll say it's 13 instead of 17. Things like that that still take you into the story, but without, losing client confidentiality. So with that, I have some really fun stories. I have clients on basically death row, but they're going back and forth with appeals. I've done so many trials, like I've testified at murder trials. I've been in rehab centers where like basically borderline Baker acting people is like my weekend. And so some of these stories will seem crazy, but I will also try to battle them with like a more average subset. So if I forget if it was in what he said, but I have borderline personality disorder. And the joke between my psychiatrist and therapist is like, it's probably actually like narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial, but the way that society stereotypes those, like I just don't even want to look at it. So like I just define as borderline. And I've decided like this is what I want to do, is leave the legacy that personality disordered people, especially cluster Bs, are actually really loving, really kind, and really loyal. But it's about how to separate the two sides and how to bring out the healthy version of us. So that's what I'm here to talk about. And as we go, I'm going to leave like little nuggets of time for questions. But I am a huge fan of you guys asking questions as we go, because once my brain has moved on, I will be like, I don't even remember what I said back then. So raise your hand. There's even a button where I think you can raise your hand, and then there's a Q&A section. So the chat, I would ask that you guys put things in there for everybody. So the chat would be more like, hey, I heard Brene Brown talking about that. Here's the link. This counseling practice does that really well too. And so I would say the chat is more for everybody, and then the Q&A would be for me. So I'm only going to be looking at the raise hands and the Q&As as a place for me to turn to. There is one chat in here. Let me just make sure that's not for me. Oh, Jesse didn't know. Oh, okay, great. Sorry, I'm already sharing screen. Let me go backwards and get rid of this. Okay. So these are the clusters. We're going to stay on this page very short, but it's a nice screensaver. Cluster A is the odd, literally like that's what we know it as, is just the odd and eccentric kind of cluster. We call it kind of the schizo cluster, but only doing that with the right people, because most people, when I say like the schizos, they think schizophrenia and like that group. Whereas like in personality disorder world, it's just like cluster A. So it's paranoid personality disorder, schizoid, and schizotypal. I'm going to go into what they mean more on the next page. Cluster B, which is what I am, is called the dramatic, borderline, antisocial, narcissistic. Most people have heard of those, but histrionic falls in here. And a lot of people have never even heard of this term. So again, I'll go into it more on the next page. Let me get rid of this little video so I can, there we go. Cluster C. So this is the anxious cluster, the dependent, the avoidant, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So not to be confused with just OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. They are very similar, but different. But OCPD will not show up in somebody's life like OCD. All right, moving forward. Wait, there's another chat. I just want to make sure. Okay, great. Thank you, Jesse. Move forward. Oh, here. There we go. All right, paranoid. One more kind of foundational piece before I do this. You'll probably read these, maybe not cluster A, but definitely cluster B and cluster C. Most people read those and they're like, that's all of us. Like, even if you look at paranoid, it's extreme distrust, unforgiving and holding grudges, cold and distant, belief that they will be harmed, social isolation, becomes angry and hostile, and then blows insults out of proportion. So most people, when they see this, they're like, that's me if I'm about to start my period. So we want to stay away from that. These are characteristics and tendencies that a lot of people have. Until it ruins your life, and potentially on multiple different occasions, we're not towards a personality disorder. So almost everybody, I would say, goes through a paranoid period of their life, or might have some paranoid tendencies after a break-in or an assault. That is not what we're talking about here. This is somebody who is so paranoid that they're unable to have relationships. They are unable to keep a job, maybe. They are unable to, even with kids, like go on vacations. It almost looks like agoraphobia at times, which is kind of the cluster A vibe. But most of them actually do have relationships. They are just chaotic. So what I would offer is anything that just feels unbelievably chaotic, try out a personality disorder to see like if they meet some criteria and if it feels like it fits. On the chat things. Oh, perfect. Sorry, just making sure that those chats aren't for me. Great, they get confusing. So separating narcissistic tendencies, which like everywhere on TikTok right now, like TikTok, Instagram is all about borderline and narcissistic. And then every single like Law and Order or like Lifetime movie is about antisocial. But those are the stereotypes, not the tendencies or the disorder. Those are stereotypes. So that is paranoid. One of my paranoid clients, sometimes they can take it as far as like, I have to put my computer on the outside of the room because they think the CIA is listening, but that's even a little bit too far. Paranoid in this one might be like, I'm only being hired so that they can like fire me later, or that they can say that I stole from the company. Like it's a little bit more rational, if that makes sense. Schizoid, limited in emotions, doesn't feel pleasure often, cold and distant, lack social skills, and social isolation. So this is another one that's close to agoraphobia. This person doesn't want relationships, and doesn't really have them. They're capable of making them. So like a schizoid client at treatment, a lot of the times like does fine. They just come across as like an asshole. They're the one who everybody else is on smoke breaks. Everybody else is like petting the horses. And the schizoid is just like sitting in the kitchen. They're just kind of flat. These individuals often get confused with autism, which you'll hear me reference that a few more times. Autism, and actually I have a whole slide on it. Autism and personality disorders are actually very, very similar in the way that they show up, especially in older clients, because they've been trained by society so much that like we don't even really know, are you doing this because of your autism or because you learned you had to? Are you doing this because you're schizoid or because you want to make it in the world? And so we'll go over how to tell them apart in a little bit. But schizoid is someone who exists in the world, just has an overall very high disdain, but does interact. Schizotypal. This is a lot of people. Oh my God, did I do the opposite one? Hold on. No, I got it. So schizotypal is, it's like bipolar mixed with a personality disorder. So this is honestly for me the hardest one to figure out because it looks so similar to some cluster Bs and just bipolar in general. But it's unusual thinking, beliefs, and behaviors. So this is just like the manic side of it. They might hear voices, few to no relationships, unusual social behaviors, flat emotions, believes casual incidents or events have hidden messages. So this would be, I would say, like the manic, the depressive, but it's a lot more chaotic. So that's why it's just so hard to tell because bipolar itself is chaotic. But once you start working with personality disorders, like you just kind of get it where you're like, this isn't clicking the way it's supposed to. All right, let's go next. My next favorite slide, cluster B. All right, I'm gonna, what is it called? Skim through these, and because I want to hit on histrionic and then the differences. So borderline, strong fear of being alone, perpetual emptiness, low self-esteem, unstable relationships, stress-induced paranoia, high tolerance for risk, unstable mood, and compete socially. So I want to put stress-induced paranoia here because sometimes I've worked with people who are like, oh, they're a paranoid personality. And it's like, no, it only really occurs when they feel abandoned or when they feel like they're losing control. So it would be separate. Antisocial, which honestly is, I would say, the dumbest name I've ever heard. And like, sorry for whoever came up with it. But antisocial has nothing to do with social. If anything, they're actually all stars when it comes to like being in social settings. It really should be called, in my opinion, anti-societal. So they violate the rights of others. They have little concerns for feelings. They lie, cheat, con, manipulate. They're typically aggressive and violent when they feel caught or threatened. High tolerance for risk, as you can see, same with borderline. Little regret, reckless, and impulsive. So antisocial is more like most of my antisocial clients, they actually have a good amount of friends, like 4 good friends, which is a lot more than people would think. Because I will hear often where people are like, oh my God, I'm antisocial. Like, I never want to go out. And I'm like, no, that has nothing to do with it. If anything, you would be cluster A or agoraphobia. Antisocial is somebody who parks in a handicapped parking spot and they really don't care if somebody who's handicapped and needs it comes. This is somebody who steals from a store, not because of any like emotional gain. They just want it and they don't want to pay for it. Like it's very simple. It's a disdain for laws and rules that negatively impact you. And then mixed with, it is very much rules for me, or excuse me, rules for thee, not for me. So I'm not sure if everybody has one, but my favorite serial killer is the BTK killer. And if you know much about his story, he is the picture perfect antisocial. So he actually had a family, a job. He worked in a church, like volunteered at a church, worked in the city. And he walked around every day giving tickets to people who, like, their fences were the wrong color or their grass was too tall. And he would get pissed. He would be like, this is unacceptable. You're ruining the neighborhood. Like, you need to paint your fence a different color, while kidnapping and murdering women. So like, that's a great example where like they have such disdain for people who negatively impact them, but they don't carry that empathy back over unless it's one of like their special people. Antisocial and borderlines and everybody are capable of empathy. It just hits a little bit different. Okay, I'm gonna go to the narcissist just because it's another one of the ones everybody knows. Doesn't understand others' feelings, stretches the truth, takes advantage of others, highly jealous, excuse me, excessive bragging, desires admiration, and excessive fantasies. So one of my tales for looking at a narcissism is when one of my clients says something like, oh, I think I'm gonna get this Fortune 500 job in marketing. I have an interview, or like, I'm applying tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that you had a marketing degree. And they're like, oh, I don't. Details. Anytime like somebody with narcissistic personality disorder has a big dream and you kind of like poke it, there will be no detailed response. So like an average person with a big dream, they will tell you, oh, I'm going to achieve it by getting a marketing degree, hiring a business coach to work on my skills, hiring an interview coach, networking. And you're kind of like, wow, I mean, that's a really big goal, but like, okay. But like somebody with narcissism would say, oh, just the details. Like basically, I'm enough to make it happen. So the interesting thing that I'm going to start pressing for the empathy. Everybody, okay, that's dramatic. Bring it back. A lot of people look at narcissists and the other cluster Bs, but mostly narcissists, as liars. And they do lie, for sure, and that's not okay. But when they are doing their excessive bragging and the like big dreams and fantasies, they're not actually lying. Like if you hook them up to a lie detection test, it would not give any flags. Narcissists are as attached to their future as somebody with trauma is attached to the past. And so an analogy to kind of make that make sense. If I have been attacked, pickpocketed in an alley in New York, anytime I walk down an alley in New York, my brain is going to say, high alert, you could be pickpocketed again. A narcissist attaches to their future as if it has already happened. And so they really do believe that they are capable of unbelievable things. And they get annoyed that like your questions don't back them up. So to us, like an average person listening, we're like, what is happening? Like, why are you even saying this? But to them, they're just walking you through their day-to-day. As somebody else might say, I'm going to Trader Joe's this weekend, a narcissist is saying, I'm going to figure out how to win $1 million. So we want to try to pull back from the fact that they are lying, because that's where you'll get really distant from clients, is this belief that like they are walking around purposely trying to hurt people all the time. Given we do at times, we'll get into that. But we are not walking around all the time. Like most of the time, I'm just existing and looking, but the way my brain thinks makes people think I'm judging them or has people believing that I don't like them. But in regard, like, I'm just trying to figure out, like, oh, why would you go to Trader Joe's when you could just deliver it? Okay, so that's narcissist. Histrionic, seeks chronic attention, overly dramatic, speaks strongly without detail, shallow emotions, high concern for physical appearance, and relationships are not reciprocated. So histrionic is, it actually comes from the word, like histrionic is somebody that we used to just call like a lot, out of pocket. If you're a teenager, they might refer to it as that, or pick me. If you work with teens, there's some fun words for you. They are just very, very needy, but the difference between like a borderline and a histrionic, because they can look similar, is a borderline is aggressively in need of relationships. Calling, are you sure you love me? Are you coming over? Why don't you come over here? Like, we expect to be loved. And so it's like a very aggressive stance. And then typically, like, we are just about like having control in a situation. But a histrionic person, they're going to be just as afraid that somebody leaves, but it's going to be from a place of like, I'm not sure why nobody loves me. I don't think anybody's going to love me. The shallow emotions is really important in this one. If I were to be sitting in front of somebody with histrionic and asking them questions like, what's the reason you lost your last job? Or tell me about your relationship with your mother. They want to come across as somebody who like doesn't know how to control their life. So they will be very shallow. How come you lost your last job question? They might say, oh, it wasn't a good fit. I'd be like, okay, why wasn't it a good fit? I want to learn for next time. My boss just didn't click. Like, okay, how did it not click? There was just some things, and like very shallow. So like if you've ever had that client where you're just like, what are they even saying? That would to me say like we're in the histrionic world. Another analogy I love is if there's a room full of people and like a borderline is trying to create chaos, I would walk in the room and be like, you slept with my boyfriend. And I would just like shout it in front of everybody. Not anymore. Old me. But I would just shout it in front of everybody. But a histrionic person is going to come in and start whispering to somebody, did you hear Jane Doe slept with Jen's boyfriend? And it's going to get around the whole room that it creates just as much chaos, but nobody knows where it came from. So histrionic is typically the family, the friends, the person are often very shocked that they have a personality disorder. Whereas the other ones, most of my clients, like the day that they fully get diagnosed is one of the best days of their life. They're like, this is what's been going on. This is why I can't understand. But a histrionic person, they have not created a ton of chaos that they're responsible for. They're typically the life where you're like, God, why is all this happening to you? Why do you always get cheated on? Why do you always get fired? And if you're looking at it in enough detail, you're like, oh my God, you're doing this. Like, I even had one recently where they didn't ever meet their job requirements, like ever. And when they got fired, she was like, yeah, they just had it out for me. And I'm like, no, you didn't ever turn your work in. That's why you got fired. And they're like, no, I don't think so. Okay, so that's the cluster Bs. Okay, I'm gonna pause for questions because cluster B is like the most talked about, I guess I would say. So I wanna be able to go over the intricacies. I'll wait like 15 seconds to see if there's anything. Okay, Michael. Unmute yourself. Michael Neff.
Hi, it's Michaela. Very close
Oh,
though.
perfect. Thank you.
No, yeah, no problem. Anyway, I'm really curious what you mean about no details. I've heard you mention that it's probably shorthand for you for something. Can you give a little more understanding to me what it means, no details? Because I've heard you say it for different types of presentations, and I really want to understand this more.
Yeah. Have you ever been in a situation where like you don't want to be caught?
Oh, sure.
Okay. And so if somebody were to ask you like, wait, but where were you when blank happened? And you were trying not to get caught, how would you answer that question?
There could be like an avoidant response where I give different unrelated information. There could be quiet, like plead the fifth in my head kind of a circumstance.
Mhm.
Is that what you mean? Like there's no details about the particular question?
The first one would be closer. The second one of
Okay.
silence would not be it either,
Okay.
because that wouldn't get them the attention that they needed for histrionic.
Okay.
But it's almost like an avoidance.
Okay.
So a histrionic lack of detail, or
Mhm.
like shallow emotions.
Mhm.
If somebody was like, well, where were you assaulted? They'd be like, it was in New York. Okay, but like where? I was leaving a restaurant. What restaurant? You'll have to ask my friend. I don't really remember. So like you leave the conversation almost knowing nothing more than when you entered. But the reason it kind of like gets so confusing is you're like, wait, I just had an hour-long conversation with this person. And we had a full conversation, but I don't know what we talked about.
Got it. Okay.
Does that
So
click at all?
it's the specific detail.
Yeah, they would definitely not give specific detail. And the difference would be a narcissist uses lack of detail in their forward thinking. A histrionic uses lack of detail in what's already occurred.
That helps a lot. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Who else? All right. Let me get rid of this screen. Invite more. No. Hold on, team. All right, I'm going to do dependent before I figure out how to get rid of that screen. Maybe it'll just go away. Okay, dependent. Overly reliant on others, submissive and clingy, lacks confidence and independence, need heavy advice and comfort, high tolerance for abuse, constantly in relationships, and doesn't really disagree with others. So this will look very similar to like reactive attachment disorder or disorganized attachment sometimes. But again, when it comes to personality disorders, it's crazy. It has got to have reached the crazy spot. And if the word crazy offends you, I hear that. People give me that feedback. I actually like it because I feel like anything else just like doesn't describe it. So one of my clients who has had dependent personality disorder before is they have stayed in a relationship with somebody for 7, 8+ years, even though they lost their family, they lost all their friends, they lost their livelihood. They literally were homeless, living with their partner, and their partner had been pimping them out, even though they never wanted to. And she would come in weekly for sessions. And every week when I was like, hey, is there any desire to leave this relationship? Any desire to call family? Her response was always like, if I don't have him, I don't think I could live. To the point of craziness. And in that specific kind of like relationship, the partner ended up being physically taken away. Like she could not get a hold of him in any capacity. And she still years later, still will come into session saying, I miss this partner so much. Is there any way you think I could talk to somebody in their family even? And so there's like this desperateness for like anybody to stay close. The other thing is it can change. So some people stay with somebody for a long time. Other people, they'll go to a bar every night and find a new person as long as they can suction cup to them. You will see the suction cup of like, we're best friends, I'm moving into your apartment. You'll see that with borderlines as well. But with the dependent, they will give in to their partner's needs. A borderline will be aggressively a part of every conversation while moving very quickly. So there's like a small nuance. And then, no, I still don't know how to get rid of this thing. Hold on. I'm just gonna hit this button that says mute all. No, I don't want to do that. All right, I'm just gonna have to do it. OCPD. So I'm skipping the one in the middle, going to the right. Heavy focus on rules and details, obsession with perfection, struggles finishing things, stubborn, rigid values and ethics, low friendship interactions, and they do not ever want to delegate. This one is also very hard to like get somebody's attention that this is actually like a personality disorder, because they come across as just overly perfection, type A, generalized anxiety. They're just so high strung. That's the only way that I can really describe it, that like in one little summary. Nothing is ever okay. Other people are wrong, but everything, like, they have to fix it. So obsessive compulsive personality disorder, my flag is if I've been working with somebody for a while and it doesn't really matter what we talk about, there's just this theme of everybody gets in my way from perfection. And then the right and wrong, like if they're at work, like rules are to be followed, rules at home are to be followed. So they will typically, they have a lot of struggle parenting. I can even think of a few clients right now who their OCPD was manageable during their life. I mean, there was chaos, but they came across as just very anxious and like very authoritative. But once they had kids, it went crazy because they could just not keep anything perfect, and they couldn't manage children needing to break rules all the time. So that's OCPD. And I know I said I was going to move on, but I've got to get this. Wait, oh, I can move it. I'm just gonna have to move it around. Got it. It was hidden behind another screen. Okay, avoid it. Sensitive to criticism, rejection, low worth and confidence, avoids contact with others, does not try new things, shy in social situation, and fears disapproval and judgment. So avoidant, and then from cluster A, the difference. Avoidant wants relationships. They want them. Whereas like in cluster A, they didn't want them. They were like, I mean, I'll hang out in the kitchen at a treatment center, but like, I don't really have an even desire to talk to anybody. Avoidant is somebody who's like, I just want friends, but I know I'm going to fuck it up. I know I'm going to say something that makes them hate me. I know I'm going to say something that makes them all leave me. There's this anxiousness to it. And dependent and avoidant can look similar, because once an avoidant has found somebody who like quote unquote accepts them, they try not to let go. The difference is when this client breaks a relationship. What do they go through? It's almost like an addiction. You can't know if something is addiction or a substance use disorder until you take the substance away and then see how they desire it back after detox and stuff like that. But so if I have a client, I will have really almost no clue if they are dependent or avoidant, because they will come across as so anxious and so committed to certain relationships. But once that relationship ends, then it should become very obvious very quickly. Do they jump into another relationship within days, weeks, or does it take months, if not years, for them to find another trusted person? And that's how I would distinguish the two. Overall, though, what I would say, I focus on clusters. To me, you are cluster A, cluster B, or cluster C, and then you have a primary, secondary, and like tertiary. The details of which one you are in there, if somebody wants them, take them. I'll give you the one that I think it is. But even where I started with me, like I meet criteria for borderline narcissism and antisocial. So it's kind of even like which one is showing up today, and or which one is the primary, or which one fits in a relationship. So my style, stay closer to the clusters. Don't get as overwhelmed with which one is it unless you feel like it is absolutely necessary to their treatment. Okay, this next slide is one of my favorites. So this is me offering a break of stereotypes. So everybody really thinks serial killers are antisocial. Dependent people are crazy and like all they do is like stick to people's legs. But in all honesty, a lot of people with personality disorders are very, very successful. So the bonus, or what I like to call a superpower of personality disorders, is that we don't understand social cues. So an example for me, this is one of my safest ones. I, to this day, don't understand why, if I want to know what's inside of something, I don't get to find that out. So if you invite me to your house for dinner and I'm in your kitchen, my brain is like, open the drawers, see what's in them. I don't want to do anything with that information. I just like to know. And I specifically remember in college, somebody being like, Jen, you like, that's so rude. And I was like, what? What is rude? And they're like opening people's stuff. And I was like, but I'm not taking it. Like, I know I can't steal it. And like, that's my radar, is like taking something that doesn't belong to you is the boundary that you can't cross. But now I've learned that society has a boundary where people's things aren't for knowing about. I'm still grasping it. But so I open closets and I go through boxes. Like, if left to my own devices, that's what I do. What was I going with that? Oh, social cues. So I basically walk around in a default setting until somebody tells me that that's not appropriate for society. And then I update myself, almost like an iPhone update from like 17 iOS to 17.1. And this is going to be one of the big differences between autism and personality disorders, is personality disorders have the ability to update almost every day, taking in new societal cues. So somebody who's a 40-year-old borderline will come across differently because they have adapted to society over the years. They have all these data points now, almost like a list of like what you are not supposed to do when you go to people's houses, what you are not supposed to say at an airport. But somebody with autism, which I will say I'm not an expert, but I work with a lot of autistic therapists because we do share clients. There's not as much of an update process. Like, they will run into the same situation over and over again. Whereas a personality disordered person would almost never run into the same situation twice, because as soon as they are told, you don't work for me anymore, they'll be like, oh, well, then I'll just update the version of me. And so there's some similarities between ADHD and that, if you're hearing it, of like being able to cultivate all these different personalities and pulling them out at different times, which is another reason why it's like misdiagnosed for the spectrum. So I wanted to see if you guys had any questions on like interesting people that you see here, or like what about them represents that. Because what I'll throw out there for confidentiality reasons, like, I don't actually know if these people have them, but there are entire websites, TikToks, people that they like diagnose celebrities. So this is not just me being like, oh, I think so, but what we know about them from what is in the public, it's like, oh, this person probably has that. So anything that stands out to you guys? Rhonda. Yeah.
Well, for me, looking at Steve Jobs, right, obsessive compulsive, would you call this a dual diagnosis? Because I would think he's more of a sociopath, you know, developing something that he wouldn't even give his kids.
Yeah.
And taking over the minds of society. I mean, there's more of a diagnosis in a personality disorder, right? But his behaviors and the way he led were very much obsessive compulsive controlling. So what is your take on that in a dual diagnosis?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that we're going to run into is somebody who is a medical doctor or a licensed psychologist. They actually have different books than us at times. So in the DSM-5 VR or TR, whatever it is, there is no sociopath diagnosis and there is no psychopath diagnosis. But like a medical doctor and or certain psychologists that are trained with correct things, there is a criteria for psychopathy and sociopathy. I don't know that one. But so maybe, but like, I'm not trained enough to know that, but he could fall into, I mean, most of the time you can carry that over to antisocial and narcissism. Like, I mean, it could be a very big debate. but I picked kind of like putting him over at obsessive compulsive because I felt like it represented that diagnosis the same way. But yes, you are right. There is something else clicking up there that's not just obsessive compulsive.
Hey, Jen, someone in the chat asked about Gene Wilder. They'd like you to say more on him.
Jude, oh yeah. Hold on, where is he? Wait,
Cluster
Jude.
A. Gene Wilder.
Oh, I thought you said Jude Law. I was
Oh,
like, I
sorry.
don't see him on here. I would say I actually don't know a ton about him. Hold on, let me even Google him real fast to see what I got popping in there. Because I pulled it from the site. Oh, it's the Chocolate Factory, and I know that's what's on there. But if you have actually, it's more of his character, not him in person. That's what I needed to click. But who he is in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is very schizotypal. Like, I mean, up, down, kind of crazy. Like, you're kind of wondering like if he did some cocaine before the sets. That would be the part of him that would show up as schizotypal, not actually Gene in his real life. I don't know anything about him there. So good question. Okay.
Hi,
And,
oh,
yes.
hi, this is Amy. I was just gonna ask you to speak on how culture affects or vice versa, how the personality disorders affects culture, affects personality disorders as a whole, because our American culture
Mhm.
is, you know, we're very accepting of people that are antisocial because we like a lot of space, and that's just American culture. We're independent or what have you, but that's not necessarily the case all over the world. So, like, do these all fall into the same cultures the same way? I mean, different cultures the same way. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, good question. And I'm not sure if you meant this word, but because I'm very passionate about it, I'm going to tweak it. Antisocial doesn't really involve space. If you look at the three even represented on here, like the BTK killer, who's the one on the right, he lived with multiple people. Like, he lived with his he lived with his wife, kids, and he interacted with people all day long.
Yeah, and I really did mean avoidant. I'm sorry. I meant to say avoidance and antisocial, but okay, go ahead.
Okay, that's way better. Or that clicks in my head better. So culture absolutely factors into this. So let's take the Hispanic culture of living with multiple generations within one home is not just like a thing. Like, it is your norm. It is your culture. It's actually very strange not to, especially in first generation. So if somebody who wasn't factoring in culture looked at that, they might be like, oh, that's a dependent personality. Like, look at all these people and the relationships that they're connected to and they won't let go of. And even when things get really, really bad, in certain cultures, somebody moving out of the household is absolutely not acceptable. And so we want to make sure that we're factoring in culture to it. Even another one, I'm not harping on Hispanic, it's just popping up in my head now because I'm thinking of a certain client too. Narcissism is wildly accepted in the Hispanic and especially like Mexican population of, oh my God, there's a word for it and I'm blanking. Oh, machismo.
Machismo.
Yes. Machismo could be a synonym for narcissism, and it is very accepted. And so those are things we have to look for. Like, the family of somebody that has a Mexican narcissist in the ages of the 20-year-old range, because once you get older, people don't accept it as much. But like a 25-year-old machismo person, there's a good chance that they also might be narcissistic, but the family wouldn't be pushing for therapy, or the culture wouldn't be pushing for therapy as much. One, Hispanic culture in general doesn't typically run to therapy. And two, that is just a part of their culture. So yes, absolutely, culture needs to be a part of it. What I will say though is it doesn't matter what culture I'm speaking to. there is an anxiety that comes across when somebody's talking about it, is if it's a personality disorder. So if I were to be talking to somebody in the Indian culture or Hispanic culture about like, how come you don't ask your mom to move if she continuously crosses your boundaries in parenting your kids? If they are abiding by culture, they'll stay pretty calm and just be like, you know, like, I really wish I could, but like, I can't do that to my family. I can't do that to my dad. And there's a calmness in sharing it. But if it was more about dependent personality, I would see like, well, what would happen if they left? What would they say? Would they ever come back? And like, those are the nuances that I'm looking for more than just the words. I'm going to click this chat button because I see, who are the two blonde women on the narcissist? Oh my God, I love whoever did that. All right, one in the middle is let me even see if somebody, okay, one in the middle is Jenny. Oh my God, I'm gonna blank. She's actually from the 90s and
McCarthy.
thank you, Jenny McCarthy. Honestly, if you're from the 90s or the early 2000s, like she's our muse. She's iconic. But she had a reality show, I think one of the first ones about dating just her. And then she's Baywatch. Or no, that's the one on the left. Who's the one on the left from all the sitcoms?
Suzanne Summers, and Jenny is from Baywatch as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The one that thinks autism is caused, yes, that is her. The one in the middle, Jenny McCarthy, she was actually married to Jim Carrey for a while, who you will see is on the borderline. It is not abnormal to have personality disordered people marry each other, but I'm going to just throw this out there. They really shouldn't. They shouldn't. What typically happens is when two personality disordered people meet each other, I can almost smell it. It is like a pheromone. It is a weird thing. I will cover that, Susan, in 1 second. But like, I can tell if somebody has a personality disorder typically, given I would never diagnose off of that. But like, even at a dinner table, I'll be like, Queen over there, she's got narcissism. And it's electric. Like my friends that have personality disorders, we have the best time ever because there is no feedback. Like we don't offend each other. A night out to us is like the hangover to other people. So there is this electricness between personality disordered people. And a lot of people get that confused with love. People would debate this because in mental health, it's not like we can do an x-ray. But that's not love, that's electricness. Electricness deserves its own space and should be honored, but it's not love. Okay, yes, Pete Davidson from Dorothy from SNL has been very open, yes, about his struggles with BPD. He's a great one. I didn't put him on there. One, I think I made this before he came out, and two, within the realm, it's pretty well known. If you know who Pete is, and if you don't know who Pete is, you don't know who he is. Like if I were to show like my dad who Pete Davidson is, he'd be like, I don't know. So I tried to pick people that are a little bit more generational. And then how common are they? Wait, I just want to make sure I answered this. This is I thought Kim Kardashian would be narcissistic. Okay. I love that you said that because if you know Kim, I mean, not that I've like met her, but I've actually thoroughly enjoy her personality in regards to examples. She has a heart and is way more dramatic than a typical narcissist would be. So Kim does the deal. Like most narcissists, and like Oprah's to the side because like obviously she's really famous, but Oprah even has done like one thing great. She has a show where she is the star, and then like she does great things through there. But like Kim Kardashian is a lawyer who like takes on innocent project cases. When a bunch of stuff was happening in the Middle East and America, like the US government needed to get people out, Kim Kardashian sent a plane. So Kim actually has a lot more heart in her and commitment to getting things done than a narcissist would. So that's my thing with that. Oh my God, I got it wrong with histrionic, but it's still the kind of same thing of not narcissism. Michael Jackson, if you know anything about him, he really like stayed away from most people, except if you knew him, like you got in. There's also the other things that we all know about Michael Jackson. So like, we don't know. But if you read anything about his life, he was not at the center of attention. Like, he didn't, I think if I'm even getting it right, like he didn't even want to be in the band. But he loved his family enough that like he was going to do the next right thing for them. Okay, I think that's good for these kind of people because I could honestly talk about them for forever. But personality disorders, how common they are. This number will change. You could pull up 5 different articles and get 5 different answers. But the one that I go with the most is going to be about 3 to 5%. It does change. Like I think histrionics, any female cluster A, I'll answer that, Hannah. Narcissist, I feel like is closer to like the 5% range, and like a schizoid would be closer to the 2% range. But that's also like schizoids don't cause as much chaos as narcissists. They may not come into the office. But I feel pretty good with the number of 3 to 5%, but I have seen it going as high as like 8% and as low as 1%. So the way I like to look at it is if I am at a dinner party or a wedding and there's 100 people there, at least 3 to 5 people are going to have a personality disorder. Okay, for the clusters, that's actually great, Hannah. I've never even really noticed that it's all male. I have the paranoid. I would say I've seen female versions, but honestly, like the cluster A version is heavily, heavily male. So yeah, good call out. Okay, I'm going to go on. Let me move this now that I know how to close it. Bing. Okay, this is me. I'm gonna go real fast through this one because this is actually a shorter presentation that I do. Okay, the one in the top left, that was me in kindergarten. I'm actually doing my dissertation, cross my fingers, I get approval soon, on creating an assessment for elementary school children, 6 to like 11, to be able to mark like a high chance of having a personality disorder. I don't know if it's going to work, but there are actually multiple experiences within an elementary school timeline that marks a personality disorder. I have a 7-year-old and she's been in therapy for a while for many different reasons, like nothing that the public would ever see. One, just because I know that her likelihood of having a personality disorder is higher because I believe in genetics around it. Some people don't, but my sidebars research also believes that at this point. And her therapist has even said, like, she hits the markers. This is absolutely abnormal. I think even the words have been used. My 7-year-old daughter, who just turned 7 like 2 months ago, has the emotional manipulation of a teenager. And so there are actually factors that come out in elementary school where a client who has a personality disorder should say, I know I've been different my whole life. There are parts of personality disorders that become a lot bigger later, but I can't think of one client that I've had who didn't realize in elementary school that society didn't understand them. So I put that one in there. The picture is actually, I'm blind in my left eye, born that way, some kind of cataract. But so in growing up, I was supposed to put a patch over my right eye, so the good eye, to try to strengthen the left one. And this picture, which I forgot I'd even done this, if you look at it, my patch is actually on the left eye. So like the dead eye, as I now call it. And so my mom was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like in kindergarten, you already were manipulating the teachers, which now I remember. I would literally manipulate the teachers into thinking my left eye was the eye the patch was supposed to be on, because they would constantly be like, hey, put it on your right eye, put it on your right eye. But I couldn't see and I didn't want it there. So in kindergarten, I was already able to, for weeks, get the teachers to be manipulated on which eye was which and not to call my mom to find out. And then I would switch it when my mom picked me up. And like, I had that kind of emotional manipulation at the age of 5 or 6. The R bar, my birthday bash, that's just an example of like a little narcissism and borderline for you. I loved knowing the right people. I loved every birthday, which you'll see, my birthday's coming up again this week. Birthdays are a very weird thing for personality cluster Bs especially, and probably C. What I expect for my birthday will never be met, and it is something I'm constantly having to deal with. And my parents did not help. My parents were enablers because they would basically make this happen. But for my birthday, like I, as a 37-year-old, don't understand why my friends don't take off work for my birthday. Like that's the level of self-orientation that my brain defaults to. And I now know that it's not socially acceptable and you can't actually like expect that, but that is an evolution I've had to make. So that one's just to show you that like I'm very extra in college. I every single year got like a bar to throw me a party, blah, 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 blah. The arrest, I've been arrested 8 times. 8. Yeah. I actually had to wait to get my LPC for a certain amount of time. So like my grad school, like I just went and worked at Lululemon for a little bit because I had to wait 10 years from this certain arrest. So yeah, I mean, drug dealing, breaking and entering. And to me, it was just like I got arrested for everything, even though like nothing I did was like that bad. But my antisocialness comes out. And like, I mean, I've even like tried to punch a cop in the face. Like authority means nothing to antisocials. And I wasn't even like drunk for all of them. The fact that somebody thinks they can tell me what to do, my default setting is like, absolutely not. And I'm going to show you why. Given I don't do that anymore, I'm just being honest about like what was there. I was sentenced to a little bit of time and things like that. So it got ratchet. Yeah, I broke probation all the time. And then the video of this just man with a Texas flag. So an example of what else you'll see in personality disorders, everything's just a little bit weird. So that's actually my husband. We've been married for 13 years. We have 2 beautiful kids. We are soulmates. But we got married over Skype while he was deployed in the military. And so like, that's just an example of like, everybody's like, why don't you just wait? And I was like, I don't want to. So like our risk taking, our ability to live outside of the norm creates a lot of cool things, which is why success tends to come too. It's like, even like Steve Jobs, tell him he can't make a phone that changes the world and he'll show you he can. I'm just going to open this chat real fast to see what it is. Happy birthday to me. I knew I was different as a kid. Fun fact is my favorite icebreaker. Like other people are like, I don't know a fun fact. And I'm like, bitch, I got 27. I've done cocaine with Mickey Avalon. I've been arrested 8 times. I'm blind in my left eye. Like I could keep going. Whereas other people are just kind of like, oh, like blue's my favorite color. And I'm like, yeah, we're not the same. Feedback. This is the one where it starts like we start to shift away from like haha to like actually what happens to personality disordered people's lives. We are told all the time things about ourselves that never fit. The things that I have heard the most are I'm a bitch, I'm an asshole, I'm mean, I'm aggressive, I'm direct, I'm intimidating, and like I don't get to decide that one. I'm hurtful, all these different things. And like, that is not me. It's really, really not. But I've now learned that the way that I say things and the fact that I even say things at all is such an interesting philosophy to other people. So an example is if I go to a dinner party at somebody else's house and they're like, oh, we made turkey. I will literally ask, oh, why? I just want to know. data points are like the currency of cluster Bs especially, but for all of them, because that's how we control whether we're safe or not, is data points. So I'll ask, like, why'd you make turkey? Which now I know people hear as like, I don't like turkey and I like disagree. And if you see my face, I still just like, it's very confusing. But so feedback never matches intention. So eventually I decided, like, fuck all of y'all. If y'all think I'm such a bitch, I'll be a bitch. And then I turn off the healthy side of me. And I, just gave my personality disorder free range. If I am gonna, this is what I was telling myself, if I'm gonna be healthy and I still am told all these negative things, I'm just gonna be them. And so this is when my life started to get like, quote unquote, ruined, given like, came back like Phoenix. But that's when I started to get arrested. That's when I started to lose friends. That's when I'd start to get into bar fights. Like, I just owned it. And I really, really hurt people, like really, really hurt people. Part of it was in high school. It's like the last year. And one of the things that I did, and like, this is the other thing is we, like, especially borderlines, like we will probably win. And if anybody asks me, like, what should I do if a borderline's mad at me? I'm like, honestly, just say you're sorry and walk away. Because the extremes that we will go to isn't a choice. Technically it is if we're not going to therapy and all that, but like once the unhealthy part of our brain is taking over, it's almost not a choice to stop. It would be the same thing as telling a depressed person, like, just stop being depressed. So telling a borderline person to let go of something, like that somebody harmed me or harmed my family, would be just as impossible to give up. So an example that always gets people going, in high school, this girl slept with my best friend's boyfriend, and everybody else, was like, oh, we hate her, all these like normal things. But then I was like, hey, let's really ruin her life. So we created a fake ID in her name with her picture, and then turned it into the principal of our high school and said we found it so that she got suspended. So like, that's the intricacy of like where our brains take us. So unhealthy, so not cool. I'm not backing it up, but that's just an example of what happens in our brains. And like, I sometimes can't sleep until I feel like I've basically evened the scale with somebody. Given now, like, this is all old me. Like, now I'm in therapy every week. Me and my girl Katie are gonna be best friends for forever. This is when the unhealthiness is winning. But this is where we get all the negative stereotypes. And like, that's what I really want to get across, is between the ages of me of like 17 and 24, I was the most stereotypical borderline antisocial narcissist. But it's not fair to these disorders, the people who have them, in my opinion, to judge an entire population on 8 out of my 80 years. Because like, I do really, really good things for the world as well. During that time, not so much. So what I challenge everybody to look at is, don't focus on the stereotypical years or the stereotypical choices. Ask what they're doing other than that. So there was a study, it's not big enough to be evidence-based or like peer-reviewed, but it was a study about the good that personality disorders bring. And it actually showed that like people, cluster B, let's go there because I think that's what it does. Cluster B gives more money to charities than any other grouping, or like even compared to like a norm. Cluster B stops and helps people on the side of the road more than the average. Because even think about it, like the risk involved of like stopping on the side of the road and helping somebody change their change their tire. Or for me, which I had to stop out of respect for my husband, I'll pick up a hitchhiker. I mean, to me, I'm like, we are 2 people with one goal. Why wouldn't we ride in one car? And so like, there's actually a lot of good that our symptoms can bring to the world if used with the right control. So like, no, I don't think it's actually safe, but like my risk tolerance is so high that picking up a hitchhiker doesn't even touch it. Can think of 5 different times that I've picked somebody up, put them in my car, gotten them gas, and driven them back to their car. Most people have never even done it once. Rhonda, yes.
When you say that, would it change if you had your children in the car?
Yeah. I mean, yes, I would not do it with them in the car. But honestly, not because I would be interested to know if I had kids in that period, what I would have done. But like now I know that it's so socially unacceptable to bring in a hitchhiker with kids in the car. I couldn't do it, but there's a chance I would if I didn't know.
But as a mother, now, would you, knowing that there's risk because you don't know the hitchhiker?
Okay,
Does
so
that
this
change?
is where
I just want to know if that changes.
I would say it honestly really doesn't. I've evolved enough to know to never do it, but this is also where like the narcissism comes out. My brain genuinely believes, default setting, that if I put somebody in the car and they ended up being a serial killer, I would be able to fight them off. And so that's where the risk tolerance comes from, is because our belief that we could handle any situation is so high. So like to me, when you ask that question, I'm like, I don't know if I would or wouldn't, because like I wouldn't want to put my kids at harm. But like I would just kick the guy out of the car, which like I know isn't real, which is like where the grandioseness comes in. So that's how I would answer it, is like I've been trained enough by society that my gut is saying absolutely not. But I also know my unhealthy brain enough to say I don't know. And for all the people out there that are like, I can't believe you would do that, I would never actually put my kids in harm's way in a way that made sense to my brain. But if I think I can solve any situation, then my kids getting in harm's way is never a factor in that situation. That's the fucked upness. Any thoughts, Rhonda? I know it's kind of crazy.
So, well, you know, that's why they call it a disorder, but
Right.
now with your therapy and the work that you're doing, do you make allowance for what the prefrontal cortex does, which is adaptation, reasoning, cause and effect?
Yes.
I've read stories that when a hitchhiker got in the car, there's a possibility they could be a killer. Will I do that with my kids?
Yeah. And so I'm just not allowed to have strangers in my car. Like that's a black and white rule that my husband made. And so like I would never touch it. But let me go to the reasoning, because that's a really good question of like, because we can also take one situation and put it on others, especially with therapy. So these situations are so funny, but like you can't call CPS because I didn't actually do them. It's just thoughts. There's absolutely, when my kid was an infant, my first one, I want to say maybe like 1 to 2, but like, you know, that moment where your kids fall asleep in the car, and if you wake them up, you know, your entire day is ruined. Like you'd rather sit in the car for 8 hours than wake them up. There was a time where that happened, and I was sleep deprived. I was all these different things. And I had ordered a smoothie for pickup at like a local smoothie place. So it wasn't like Smoothie King or anything where they would bring it out to the car. It was like you had to walk in to go get it. So I was sitting there and I literally was like, I'm just gonna go grab it. I'm just gonna go grab it. Like, but where I parked is in Preston Center, if you know Dallas at all. It was probably gonna be like a 90-second walk. I legitimately, in my head was like, there is not a problem with this. I will leave the car running. She is sleeping, 90 seconds, get my smoothie, move on. But then I was like, all right. What would society say about this? And then something that I run through is, if a cop asked me what I did, would I be okay sharing it? And that's one of my big filters. If there was a judge or a cop who asked me what I did today, would I feel like I'd get in trouble? And so I chose not to, woke my daughter up, went and got the smoothie. But it's not because like I want to. It is because I understand that I can't trust my brain all the time. And so I bring in my prefrontal cortex and my reasoning skills to make healthier decisions.
And it's interesting because it's an external locus of control that this is an adaptive behavior, an adapted pattern of reasoning, but instead of the internal locus of control that I'm wondering, not to say that anyone with that borderline personality disorder doesn't have, but it or can't have, but
Yeah, you got it.
your adaptation is using the external locus of control to assist your reasoning. I get that's good.
Yeah, I mean, if I knew I wouldn't have gotten caught, I would have walked into that smoothie thing with my kid in the car 100%. But the external locus of control is absolutely my filtering. And because I have a life worth losing now. So let's go back to like how personality disorders blow once people start stereotyping them. So in my opinion, I'm a very kind person who came across as a mean person. So I got told I was a mean person. So then I matched society, or I kind of was just like, sorry, I was reading something else. Then I was like, all right, I'll be a mean person. Then what happens though is I lose everything. So then once I even get to understand, like I go to therapy or somebody says like, you can stop doing this, I don't care enough at that point. I don't have anything to lose. Everybody has left me. I have no job. I have no money, no place to live. And so at that point, the external locus of control doesn't have as much weight because it's like, okay, send me to jail again. I don't fucking care. Like, and then the risk tolerance comes in because for me, going to a homeless shelter was like a fun Friday night. I was like, that shit's crazy in there. And so like focusing on relationships in the treatment planning is so important. I can't even highlight it enough. If there is nothing for this personality disordered person to lose, you will not get them in a cat and mouse game. If you play cat and mouse with me, I'll go to a homeless shelter and I will literally be I will end up throwing like a comedy event that night while I'm there. But if you tell me my husband's going to leave me if I do this, hands down, done, not even going to think about it. Same with my career. So focusing on like what is worth living for, what would hurt to lose, that's how the best way to make decisions are versus like, don't do that, it's mean. Because for me, I'm like, that's just annoying. So that can be a confusing, but like, that's just kind of how I would summarize the demise of personality disorders and then the potential reprieve. But luckily enough for me, my family never gave up on me. 98% just enabled the whole time. And I do wish they would have done things differently, like actually hold me accountable. But it did come in handy when I was done and I wanted to get my life back together. I had relationships immediately waiting for me, but not everybody has that. All right. Cruising through. This one's pretty fast. Differential diagnoses. So it may sound like I take these diagnoses loosely because I throw them out all the time. I absolutely do not. There are so many differential diagnoses that need to be covered. And I'm the type of, like, the way that I do it is I put everything on the table that could even remotely touch this person. And then I am going to default through assessments, other therapists, getting to know them, take things off until there's one left. Excuse me. And if that one left is a personality disorder, ta-da. So with cluster A, schizophrenia, social anxiety, schizoaffective, bipolar, delusional disorder, agoraphobia, and substance abuse. Cluster B, addiction, complex PTSD. Not in any of our diagnosis books, but it is so relevant because complex PTSD looks like cluster B. But the difference is once you treat the trauma, the symptoms go away. So that's how you can tell that one. Autism, reactive attachment, ADHD, PMDD, premenstrual or postmenstrual dysphoric disorder, pyromania, kleptomania, and substance abuse. So with pyromania and kleptomania, it's important to me to know before getting to an antisocial diagnosis that, like, do they just love setting fires or stealing? And is there another thing that they're getting out of that? Or is it they're setting fires because of a larger theme of like, I get to do what I want to do? So pyromaniacs, kleptomaniacs can be misdiagnosed as antisocial and or narcissists for kleptomania. But it's really important to figure out like what's the driving factor. And then cluster C, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, major depressive disorder, separation anxiety, agoraphobia, substance use or substance abuse. All right, let's cruise. Okay, so this one's going to take a little bit of setup. Let me move this box. Okay, so this is how to rule out. If I have somebody that's coming to me, and in this case, let me get my created facts. Yep. All right, so this is let's say about a 55-year-old man came in with a recent substance use binge, like a cocaine binge at a hotel for a weekend. And they scored a 6 on the ACE, so the adverse childhood experiences, and they were coming in to work on themselves. God, I keep having to use this. Okay. The things that would be on the table would be a lot, but let's narrow it down to just the 4 that I have listed here of narcissism, autism, substance abuse / addiction, but I did S because I already have an A, and then complex PTSD. So let's look at social skills. So if somebody has substance abuse, their social skills could be kind of anything. It could even be low, like they may not be interacting with other people. Autism, social skills could be low. Complex PTSD, it kind of depends on what happens. Like those things wouldn't fall in there. But if they were a narcissist, social skills at the age of 55 would be on the high end. Like they would have that down to a science. This one's where it gets tricky. Let's do self-sabotage. Complex PTSD, substance use, and narcissist will all self-sabotage. They will get a job, then lose it. They will take money from a loved one and not pay it back. But like an autistic person, and I am living into some stereotypes here, and I do apologize, but like for the point of it, an autistic person doesn't really self-sabotage. They don't walk around being like, I'm purposely going to fuck up somebody's day today. And so that scale would be like, okay, let's remove autism because it's been on the low side of the scale twice, and he's been on the high end. So we could take autism off the table, but everything else is still there. So then I go to substance abuse, no help at all, because he uses a lot of substance abuse, but every single one of those diagnoses often has high substance abuse. So that doesn't help me. Then I go to intelligence. This man and most personality disordered people have a very, very high intelligence score. And this is another reason why that they can overlap and look synonymous to some autism symptoms. Like both would be in the gifted and talented program as a kid. Both could be very exceptional in school. Again, not every single one, but especially narcissists tend to have a higher IQ, and then borderlines mostly, because it takes a lot of intellect to be able to handle 50 different personalities and manage, like keep them all organized and who they belong to and things like that. So it's like, all right, I would probably take off CPTSD and substance abuse. Those aren't tracking anymore. Only narcissism is really still a factor. But let's run through one more. Ability to evolve. So this one is very helpful to me of autism, substance abuse, and complex PTSD do not evolve unless they have like particular trainings. So like obviously if somebody who has substance abuse goes to treatment, their changes would they would become healthier. Somebody with complex PTSD would become healthier if they treated their trauma. But a narcissist would evolve on their own. So even though there is not one mental health person close to a narcissist, their ability to evolve would show up on a day-to-day basis. And so with that, this is how I would have ruled out all the options other than narcissist. All right, I want to pause and, leave time for questions now. Good? Okay. All right, treatment from the empathy lens. The annoying and harmful behaviors that personality disorders have, or that we're known for, are our coping skills. So I'm trying to think of an example for me of even more recently. Sensory issues. This isn't on here, but I'm just sharing it. I think it's on the next one. Sensory issues are a huge issue with personality disordered people. Again, carry over to ADHD and autism. So if I constantly, if I'm even fighting with my husband, and I don't know if it's the same with autism and ADHD, but the amount of conversations that are going on in my head at any point in time is very, very draining. So I have my default setting, which is the borderline. Then I have my unhealthy side, which is like, do not nice things, do unhealthy things. Then I have my healthy side that's like, do nice things, do healthy things. Both of those constantly go through a filter of borderline. I work very, very hard to keep the healthy side winning. And like everybody, can relate to this, but not everybody has the borderline filter, like the mental health filter. Every, DSM diagnoses do. Then there's this next filter of society. So so I've got my unhealthy person saying, steal the shirt. And the borderline person's like, yeah, let's steal it. We deserve it. We deserve that shirt. They won't even notice. We're smart enough to get out of the store without them noticing. Then I have to put it through the society manual that I've created. So I have to think through all the times people have given me feedback that doesn't make sense to me at all. So there's not like a handy dandy little connection. I have to be like, well, wait, is this like when I open drawers and look at things that don't belong to me? Okay, it's similar. Is this like when my husband says I ask questions? No, that's not it. And so like by the time I get to a decision, I'm exhausted most of the time. Superpower, personality disorders have a ton of energy. We are like the Energizer Bunny, so that's how we can cope. But there comes a point like when I'm in an argument with my husband or my daughter has like a story going in the background, like a podcast, I will literally have to like close my eyes, cover my ears, or I will like scream. It is very, very overwhelming. So like sensory needs are a huge issue with personality disorders, and getting to understand them and having background noise. I'm gonna butcher this one because I always do the cancer one, but the mental health disease where chewing like noises really get to you. I always call it mesothelioma, but I think that's the cancer from like asbestos.
Misophonia.
Thank you. So if you guys have ever worked with somebody with that disorder, if they hear something in their ear, like if there is chewing noises in the background or other noise in the background, it actually can basically rule out the disturbing noise. And that is very similar to what like I help my clients with, because if we can listen to a podcast in the background, literally while you're having a conversation with us, I can keep a certain part of my brain at bay. Because instead of thinking about how like to create control in this conversation, it's thinking about the podcast. And so I have my favorite story is a high school teenager, ratchet little queen. I mean, would steal her parents' laptops on presentation days. Like she was out of control. But so we were working together. She got it back to control, but we were just talking about grades and kind of normal teen stuff. But her parents had a rule of no TV while doing homework. very normal. But for her brain, if she didn't have any stimulus going on in the background, she couldn't focus because she would be like, oh my God, do you think my best friends hate me? Is my boyfriend cheating on me? But as soon as we let her watch TV while doing her homework, all of her grades increased. And so the parents were just like, I just don't get it. And like, it can be very overwhelming as a parent. Excuse me. But there is a lot of trust that has to come from personality disorders, or at least trying things out. Because I'm sure you guys are thinking like, why would I trust y'all? Great question. You shouldn't all the time. But at least trying things out and having checks and balances. Because if I wouldn't have been there to be like, hey, parents, this is actually real. And like her sensory needs maybe need TV. She would have continued to get C's and B's because of her sensory needs. So the annoying and harmful behaviors that we have are the way that we deal with things. I yell at my daughter to turn off a podcast. Not really anymore because we figured it out, because I can't handle the extra noise. I don't feel safe in a relationship. And so I suction cup to you or cling onto you. I don't want you to go anywhere without me. So they're not like the behaviors are not who we are. And when you have somebody with a personality disorder and you focus on that, you're missing it. It's the same thing as like, if you've ever worked with addiction, which I also do a lot of, like we barely talk about drugs ever. Like somebody's like, I just don't want to talk about drugs anymore. I'm like, I don't see why talking about drugs is necessary in treating your addiction and substance use, because it is just a coping skill. Being misunderstood on a daily basis is so draining. We went over the second part. Eventually they believe it in order not to go crazy. But like, imagine if there was a filter where every time you gave somebody a gift, they thought you were punching them in the face. That's what it's like to be us sometimes. Every time bilateral beats serve the same purposes. Yeah, they can, but not always. Sometimes we need something actually a lot more active, because bilateral stimulation and some other tools, they keep things even, but I actually need them to distract. Like when I listen to a podcast while having a full-blown conversation with people, I need a certain part of my brain to forget I'm in a conversation. And that doesn't happen with bilateral stimulation. But yes, EMDR and bilateral stimulation is very effective for our reasoning. So using it. Sleep, it just kind of depends. The people are all over the place with that one. Oh, there was a question. I'm sorry. Do bilateral beats serve the same purpose as used in EMDR? And you already heard my answer. But yes, being misunderstood. Every time you gave somebody a gift, they asked why you punched them in the face. Another example of why it's just exhausting and you end up just stop doing it. Personality disorders think very logistically. Our questions and confusion are more about quadranting than judgment. So quadranting is a way that I can help my clients understand, like get to a closer place with empathy and feelings. So instead of a black and white, well, not instead of, like black and white and like two options is very default setting for most personality disorders. And so an example is my brain will often say, your two options are right and wrong. And my husband is wrong. And so that will just be the options. And so my husband will be like, well, can't you see my intention? And I'm like, that's just a lot of noise for you being wrong. But if I can re-quadrant, which means change like the labels of the boxes, then I can have an empathetic conversation. So I will re-quadrant myself through asking questions sometimes and be like, oh, wait, so this isn't right or wrong. This is my husband loves me, my husband doesn't love me. And he's saying he loves me, and I get that through his gift. He loves me, and I can feel like at peace. Because when my husband gives me a gift that I don't like, wait, I'll tell you guys this one because another one that really excites people. I still to this day don't understand gift giving because, like, let's say it's my birthday, which coming up, if somebody gives me a gift that I don't like, I then have to use my energy to pretend to like it because it makes you feel better when it's my day and it was my reason to start the gift giving. Do I do it? Yes. I say, oh my God, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Well, I don't really lie like that. I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like, your love for me, it was a gift enough. And I do that kind of spin on it. But that's an example where like society's needs are just so weird to me. Yes, quadranting. I was like, where's it going with that? So my husband will give me a gift, I don't like it. And in the world of right and wrong, he's wrong. And I would say, default setting, I don't like this gift. Take it back. Or I'll take it back. But then if I'm like, whoa, don't do that, re-quadrant to your husband loves you, your husband doesn't love you, I can immediately go into the quadrant of my husband loves me, and I can respond from a place of love. So that's what quadranting is. The goal of manipulation is survival, not pain. When we manipulate, it's because we feel stuck and we feel like we're going to lose our identity, our purpose, our goals if we stick to your boundaries. Given it's still not good. Like, no part of this is like an excuse why like a narcissist gets to abuse his spouse or a borderline gets to abuse his coworkers. It is not an excuse at all. It's an understanding so that we can help these disorders. Because if somebody, not even if, when people used to come up to me and be like, you need to get your shit together, nobody's going to love you. I mean, I was just like, fuck it then. Because I actually do have my stuff together. But if somebody comes up to me and they're like, hey, I love you enough to say, like, let's try that again, then I'm like, okay, let's try it again. So changing how we interact with these disorders is how we treat them, in my opinion, and like getting an empathetic lens shared across our career thing. I forget what. Okay, diagnosis label empowers some people and overwhelms others. So let the client lead. And I truly mean this. I love diagnoses, love them. Not shocking because I can put you in a quadrant. I do not diagnose my clients if they don't want to. I ask them 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Are you interested in a diagnosis? Are you interested in a label? Or do you think that would harm you? Whatever they say, that's my answer. I will still continue to work through my understanding of their diagnoses, but I'll keep it to myself. The other thing that happens though, is therapists and mental health practitioners that don't like diagnoses, they keep them from the clients. And that is equally as messed up in my mind as giving a client a diagnosis when they asked you not to. There are so many times where mental health practitioners are like, oh, it's just a label, like we don't need it. The amount of coolness that most of my clients feel when they find out negates that entire sentence. To think that you are just so fucked up that nobody will ever love you and society will never accept you, the fact that that's the plan is very difficult for me to get behind. Again, if a client doesn't want it, then I don't give it. But I am very passionate about mental health practitioners getting beyond their own beliefs of disorders, especially when it comes to personality disorders. I can't speak to the other ones as much, because it gives us a book. It gives us an understanding of like, we're not bad people. We just have a part of our brain that thinks bad things, quote unquote, are really fun. So yeah, let the client lead. And then the other one with like, I get pushback from parents all the time of like, I don't want her to be labeled. Stop calling her crazy. And I get that. I do get that. But this world in which if we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist is just so silly. Like if their kid got diagnosed with cancer, we wouldn't be like, oh, MD doctor, please don't use that word around my child. I think it limits her. And like, that's where I'm coming from with that too. Dual diagnosis can make it nearly impossible to maintain behaviors. Hold on, I'm doing a time check. Okay, good. So if a client has a really bad substance use disorder and addiction and antisocial, it's a recipe for disaster, because the cure for substance use and addiction is community. You go to AA meetings, you go to IOPs, you call others when you feel overwhelmed. But an antisocial, the cure, I could say, is that you need to isolate. So if I have an antisocial client who's like, I would like to hurt somebody, I'm like, hey, then let's just go to your apartment and be alone until we get past this feeling. But when they go home and be alone, their substance use says, go get drugs. And so they have this competing thing where one disorder is treated in a way that untreats the other one. And so that's very important to look at, as it's not so much of a choice as it's two disorders that are combating, where a lot of times people are like, oh, they just wanted to use the drugs, which also happens. Or they're just pretending something so they can be alone all weekend. They're just making this up so they can do drugs by themselves all weekend. That kind of judgment is just really harmful. Okay, the dark side. Everybody's got a dark side. I know all of these things that I'm saying at some level, almost any single human could connect to. But the dark side is the examples that I've given that take it a step further. Of the hitchhikers, letting people from jail move in with me right afterwards. It's a mess. But there is, it's an indigenous, and again, I always butcher it, but it's an indigenous belief saying of there's two wolves, a good wolf and a bad wolf. And the good wolf, whatever wolf you feed, I think that's kind of the sentence that we hear a lot, whatever wolf you feed. And so the intention of that is to get you to feed the good wolf in your brain. So with a personality disorder, if I don't listen to the quote unquote bad wolf, the dark side wolf, he will eat me. And so another way that we have a treatment plan of basically how to live with a personality disorder in a way that doesn't ruin your life, you have to incrementally give food to the dark side or the dark wolf. And so what that can look like is, for schizotypal, the one that wants to be home all the time, that one, I think it's schizotypal. There's so many. So with that, I would actually say, let's plan a weekend every month where all you do is sit in your apartment. You don't leave once, because I want to give enough food to that part of its brain where when it's time to go to work on a Monday, it doesn't say fuck this, I can't leave. So you take what the brain needs and you find a healthy time for it. Another one is the risk taking for narcissists. I have clients who on a monthly basis go skydiving. It's crazy enough and risk taking enough where it calms down their brain for the idea of risk until the next month. Another really good one is short stocks. The ones where you buy and you sell every day constantly. It's not you invest and then 6 years later you sell. But the adrenaline rush of buying and selling short stocks all day is basically the same as gambling, but it's completely legal. And as long as you have a budget, then you won't ruin your life. So those are ways that you can feed the dark wolf before it eats you alive. So for me, another way I do it is I only have 2 drinks ever. I will never have more than 2 drinks in one day, unless it's a very specific event that occurs every few years. And so that to me is I could go sober, and I was sober for a good amount of time. But what I noticed is that I ended up binging. I would get to the point where I just wanted this debauchery fun that I would go binge as a 30-year-old woman. And I would just get drunk all weekend till I was hungover. But I've noticed for almost 6 years now, if I allow myself to drink on 3 different days a week with 2 different drinks on those things, I have not had any bad consequences from them. And I don't drive at all like underneath those. So that's a way of structuring the risk taking, if you will. And then the last one, when PDs tell others about their diagnosis, the typical response is everybody does that, or no, you're not. Man, is that frustrating. If I'm wrong, just forget this, but there's a lot of clinicians where if somebody walks in and is like, oh, I'm a narcissist, they're like, oh, okay. Or I'm antisocial. There is this interesting thing in our field where we almost try to prove them wrong. And I get it. I absolutely get it. I've done that before. But if this person's saying it, like, let's roll with it, because there's something going on. If somebody walks into an office and is paying you to listen to them talk about being a narcissist, something's going on. And then to downplay it. Because when somebody asks me, hold on, let me see what this chat is. Repeat the alternate drinking strategy again. Okay, I will do this drinking thing after this. Oh, right. When I tell somebody that I'm borderline, 9 times out of 10, what I get now that I'm healthy and like live a very productive and like charitable giving life, people are like, oh, there's no way. There's no way. You're way too nice for that. You are such a leader. What are you talking about? Like, you are there for me all the time. You can't be a psychopath. One, there is nothing synonymous about psychopath and any personality disorder. They are not synonymous. Some antisocial people also are psychopaths, just like some antisocial people are also addicts. But that doesn't mean that every antisocial person is a psychopath. Maybe the top 10% of narcissists might be psychopaths. Top 10% of paranoid might be. But we're talking about such a small number now that like we got to let go of the overall stereotype, in my opinion. So yeah, and then when somebody says you're not a borderline, I find myself in a very interesting position of option 1, I list off the 20 worst things about me. And then people go, oh God, maybe you are. Which that sucks. I'm like, why do I have to, and I don't have to do anything, but like, why do I feel like I need to share my worst moments for you to believe me? Or the second thing that I do is just feel very misunderstood and just say like, oh, well, I do, while feeling very misunderstood. And so really a response is just like, oh, thank you for sharing that. The same way you would if somebody said that they were anxious or depressed. The drinking strategy. So, and this is where the overlap, like where people tell me, not anymore, but like during my little debacle phase, I went to like treatment for substance abuse. I was told I was an addict. I worked the 12 steps. I was sober because my life looked like I had a substance use disorder and addiction. And so I've had people say like, oh, you're absolutely an addict. Which I need to watch out for that because I do really dumb stuff when I'm under the influence, but I am not an addict. I have a substance use disorder if I am in an unhealthy spot because I use it to cope. So for me, the way that I honor part of my brain while knowing where it can go, I am very limited in some of my things, which can also trigger people being like, oh, if you have to watch your alcohol that much, you must have a substance use disorder. I hear that a lot. And like, no, I really don't. I know that I love my husband enough to not even get close to going to jail again. And if I can stay under 2 drinks, then I probably won't go to jail because I won't be making bad decisions. So my routine is I can drink 3 times a week and I can drink 2 drinks per event. And I chose those because one, they work for me and they're the like American average. So I thought it was a good one to go off of. And then the same thing for like stocks for some of my clients. Like we put them on a very strict budget, where they don't even know the passcodes to get into their stocks and things like that. So that like we have checks and balances. All right. Let me see what time it is. All right. I am going to do a big pause for questions, because if we end here, perfect. And if there are no questions, that I can do another slide or two. But they're on there. So I'm just going to do questions. Rhonda.
Don't diagnose me just because I have a lot of questions. So if you were to come into my office and you share with me, this is my diagnosis, and I said to you, okay, good. So what I'm hearing is, it's been my experience that you're going to like me for a while. But when we get into the work, then I'm going to be the worst therapist you ever met. So I want you to be able to communicate that with me. I don't want us to get caught up in that crossfire of what that diagnosis can bring. Is that offensive to you?
No, I'd be like, yeah, girl, I won't like you. And like, honestly, like, I don't even think that would 100% happen, because I feel like the reason that that occurs, because it does, is because we feel so misunderstood. So if somebody were to even acknowledge like, hey, there's a chance you may not like me, there's a chance you may get frustrated, I would be like, thank you for giving me the space. And then what's cool is like, if and when it happens, as a therapist, you can be like, hey, remember we talked about this. We knew this was going to happen. Yeah, that would be super cool.
Do you in your therapy, as you have grown into this healthy person, and you've made a lot of rules, and I notice on some of these diagnoses, like, oh, they have to be rule followers. There's something to be said about rules. And I love what you said about your parents. I'm doing a little study myself. When you see your kids getting into trouble, how you can teach regulation while they're young, which is why I'm guessing why you said your daughter's in therapy. So is that something when you went to therapy that you found really helpful and to help you develop this life worth living, right? To implement a lot of rules, because some people can make rules sound like it's a sickness, but it isn't. It's good to have rules, and children love rules. So is that something that you found really helpful?
Yeah, and I would call them boundaries. Sorry to cut you off. And it's the same thing, like, because boundaries are about being in a healthy spot. And so to me, my boundaries around drinking are to ensure I have a healthy marriage. And yes, for kids, I could do a whole presentation, and will eventually, around parenting a kid with a personality disorder, quote unquote. But it is just different. You can't get into a power struggle. But as a therapist, I would say that drop the power struggles with the clients, because, like, an example, I know I don't have to do anything. Like, I literally don't. I don't have to go to work. I don't have to love my husband. I don't have to drive the speed limit. I do those things because of the consequences and rewards that society gives and takes. So I go to work because I want to have a home. And so when we even get into a situation where somebody's like, a therapist would tell a client like, well, you're going to have to love them. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm done, because you don't understand me. But if you were to say, to be in a marriage, you have to evolve into a way that loves your husband, or you have to show him love, I'd be like, oh, that makes sense. And so, yes, boundaries, rules are a very good way of me. Oh, this is going to be good. I can turn off my brain, because I don't have to worry about if this is society or me making a decision, because the decision's already made. When I go out to dinner, I don't have to worry about how many drinks I'm going to have. I can literally shut that part of my brain off, because I get to have 2. Done. And so it gives me an ease. All right, Gabriella, I'm going to go to you.
So I have 2 questions. One is, do you think that it's good or even like appropriate to talk to your clients about your struggles and your diagnoses?
I do it all the time.
You do?
So this is going to be like your lawyer question, I would say, to default, but I am very heavily covered by my lawyer and insurance, for multiple reasons. But so what my lawyer told me is if it's for the client, and we all know this, like if it is for the client, then it's appropriate. And every client's a little bit different. Some clients don't give a shit about the fact that I also have a personality disorder, and I don't share anything with them. But then there's also people who I can see it in their eyes where they're like, oh my God, there's more than one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, how I cover myself, which came from my lawyer, is hold on, I see Susan up there. If you make it public, then it's not disclosure. So like I have on my website that I have a personality disorder. So, and I don't really get this, but again, I just follow like what he told me to do. It's not disclosure then because it's a publicly known sentence.
Right. Yeah, because my honest opinion is that some people see therapists as if they're perfect.
Yeah.
And so sometimes disclosing that, like, no, I also go through this, this, and this, maybe that'll give them this sense of, I don't know, like I don't know the word, but like just feel more comfortable about like, okay, you're not
yeah.
this perfect person, so I'll feel more comfortable. But my other question was, I also have a personality disorder, and I feel,
If you want to share.
So my psychiatrist says I'm bipolar, but I kind of lean towards borderline as well.
Yeah, commonly misdiagnosed as bipolar.
Yes.
So is substance use. Like I feel like bipolar is just like oh, I think you have some stuff going on. You got to be bipolar.
Yeah, but then they say it takes years to diagnose as borderline.
But
So I'm in between. But from my experience in relationships and all that comes into like borderline diagnoses, is like I have a hard time, like, do I love this person? Or is it for me? Or like there was a time where where I had a relationship that was very stable and healthy, but then that I got bored and I was like, no, I like the rush. I like the rush. I like the craziness. I like this. I like that. So like, do I love this person or is it just me?
well, and that's
So,
very, sorry to cut you off. For time's sake,
no,
I do that, and I just do it in general. It's not nice. That is so normal. And so I'm gonna give two little fun facts. Oh my God, our ability to get bored, it's very difficult. Like this is gonna sound so crazy because we are at times. I have to practice role play with my clients boring conversations
oh my
so that
God.
they can grow a tolerance to boring conversations. Because what will happen is they go out to dinner with like the gymnastic moms, or like they're at dinner while they're like their kids are competing, and all the other mom, dads, whatever, are talking about Trader Joe's. And I use that because you neurotypical people and you're like obsession with Trader Joe's, like I just don't get it. Like everywhere I go, we're talking about this cookie butter or like the
Right.
freezer thing. And so I will literally role play because if they cannot handle and have the tolerance for a quote unquote boring conversation, then they are going to ruin those relationships. So we will
Right.
practice in session. I'll go, hey, have you seen those? Oh my God, I get sick to my stomach just have you seen those no freezer burritos at Trader Joe's? And like she'll respond and then we go back and forth. Because what her brain wants to do when sitting around a group of moms that are talking about Trader Joe's, she wants to go, so you guys do cocaine? That's where I want the conversation to go. Like, let's talk about trauma. Let's talk about like what we're doing this year.
Mhm.
But then everybody, and again, these are all stereotypes and like everybody, blah, blah. But then typically everybody's like, oh my God, you're fucking crazy. And now I've lost these relationships. So boring relationships tells you it's probably healthy.
But then like as a borderline, do you like you yourself, like do you have, I know this is personal, but this is also like going on with me, like do you ever question like, do I love my husband?
Okay, so
Or
I'm gonna do long one, email me. So reminder, jenshotwell.com.
Okay.
There's some things up there, but like my email's up there, all kinds of stuff. So just message me and like I would love to help.
That's so
but what I
fun.
can
I love this topic.
yeah, what I can say is 100%. So if you've ever been married, when you get married, there's this marriage license. Everybody knows that part. But what people don't know is you have to turn it in within like 3 days. And so I had this super funny thing where I was like, oh, I'm just gonna never turn in the marriage certificate. And so like when I get divorced, because I probably will, I'll just be like, surprise, we were never married.
Right.
Because even like he's my soulmate, and I understand that now is like being married this long, but like he is not my risk-taking person.
Mm-hmm.
So like I will draw pie charts with my clients and be like, you need to have at least 6 people in your life where you pull at least one different thing from. So for you, like your partner, maybe your comfort, your stability,
Right.
your norm, but you got to have a ratchet friend that you can call. And if you don't have that, you're going to get bored and you're going to go do it on your own without any checks and balances.
That makes sense.
So that kind of thing. But I'm going to leave that there, just like honor some
Yeah.
of the questions, but reach out. My
Thank
therapist is
you.
not Katie Baird. I think I know her. I think she went to SMU. Oh, somebody sent that directly to me. Somebody asked if my therapist was Katie Baird. It's not. It's Katie Hogue or something like that, but she's phenomenal. Do you have any recommended reading? No, I don't. I will give you some of what's out there. On my website, there will be books, like ebooks and stuff, but it's always like, I'll do it tomorrow. So like, I don't know when. If you go somewhere and get a book about narcissism, it's going to tell you how you should never talk to them, how they're only going to hurt you. They're terrible humans and it's just not nice. So there's not a collection of books that stick out to me that honors the part of personality disorders that are important to me. I'm sure even most of you guys can remember a time in grad school where they said, don't ever work with them. And it really, really hurts me that this population is just seen as something that is too risky to even deal with. So I don't really have any. I think there's one where it's called It's My Turn. It's actually by a therapist. Her mom had narcissism. It's absolutely fine. Rhonda loved the word normalcy. I think that's a good thing. Thumbs up, Rhonda. Okay, great. I was like, maybe she hates it. I have a unique way. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Queens. Okay, hype. Apologies. Can we get a copy of slides? Yep, there it is. There's also one on there of like adolescent personality disorders. I gave it at the symposium and it's literally about how kids don't have to do anything. So that gets parents' attention. And I think that's probably gonna, oh my God, that's gonna be it. But if you work with personality disorders, my last thing, you better have a good lawyer that you're in contact with, because if you get one that's not ready to change, they could really try to hurt you. I've never had that because there's a respect also. If you respect personality disorders, they will respect you back. And so I've actually never once been sued, complained, anything. But I would absolutely say to have it so that you are prepared for the moment. All right, that's it from me. Nicole, Jesse, anything?
Just want to thank you for sharing all this great information. It was in your expertise in it. So thanks so much for that.
Welcome.
And then just let everybody know in a couple of hours or this afternoon, you will get an email with a link to an evaluation. And once you complete the evaluation, on the thank you page, you'll be able to download their certificate. And there's also the same link that Jen shared in here. There'll be that same link will be there. So you can download her presentation there.
Yeah, and then reach out, go to Jen Shotwell. It's jen@jenshotwell.com. I think even my personal cell phone's out there, which my husband would like me to change, but I'm not going to. So yeah, reach out on any questions, client issues, whatever. I cannot wait to help you guys work with personality disorders.
Great. Thanks so much.
Bye.